So here in South America, old instruments of tax policy are being used in order to facilitate the decarbonization. The main one are the innovation laws that exist in many countries here for extra deductions, for example, for the company who has some new technology for energy transition or something like this. It can be used as an extra deduction, especially here in Brazil. And also, my experience shows that some judicial decisions are granting tax credits for ESG expenses for the VAT here. But on the other hand, the governments are moving, especially here in Brazil, the government is moving fast. We are under tax reform here in Brazil and possibly are going to bring some good news to the COP at the end of the year in what regards some tax benefits for decarbonization.
Thanks, Louis. So from an African perspective, I think the focus has primarily been around getting the world linked or tied to whatever Africa is able to achieve or do from a tax policy perspective. So you must have heard of what we call the Nairobi Declaration, where a group of African leaders coming out from UNGA decided to push actively at the next COP for what they call a global tax, a global carbon tax. So rather than having to implement individual carbon tax policies in country, what African leaders are focused around right now from the Nairobi Declaration is having a global carbon tax system where the funds generated from that is then plowed into clean energy investments across the continent. And the reason isn't very far-fetched. African leaders tend to believe that because of the level of industrialization that we currently have on the continent, they can't afford to, in a sense, de-incentivize any form of energy or any form of investment or development, whether it is clean or not. And that the only way they will be able to do that is if it's being funded by the West, which is why they are clamoring for what they've termed a global carbon tax system, where the funds generated are then plowed into clean energy investments across the African continent. For Africa, it's primarily very similar to what I said in the answer to the first question. Beggars can be choosers. We're at a point where access to energy it's at an all-time low across the continent in terms of development. Other than South Africa and probably Egypt, the large part of the continent is very, very undeveloped. And so the continent is looking to attract all forms of investment. They're not trying to choose or discriminate. And that's the reason why there's been a reluctance to introduce any form of carbon tax or carbon pricing mechanism on the continent, because everyone is saying we need to attract investment first, get to a certain level of development, then we can then begin to sift through it and say, at this point, we want cleaner energy, we want to be focused on climate change and all of that, because the arguments you would find, especially in a country like Nigeria, where the president once argued that we contribute very little or nothing to the impact on the climate, and therefore the focus when it comes to climate change and introducing policies that seem to move to more cleaner sources of energy, Africa should not be the focus. So that's still the peculiar challenge, the state of development across the continent.
We are expecting to attract a lot of industries here because of the process of nearshoring, as we are closer to the consumer markets than the Asian countries. But the legislation is moving here. And we are expecting, as I told before, we are under a big tax reform, especially here in Brazil. And something good that is going to nearly happen is the regulation of the carbon credits here in Brazil, because it can be a huge bet for bringing investments here to the country and to keep our forests here alive. There's a problem because it's not clear at this moment how the carbon credits are recorded and taxed. So until the end of the year, we are expecting a new regulation will arise, will define how the carbon credits shall be recorded and taxed. And of course, it's going to be a kind of benchmark to the whole region, and it's going to bring more safety for the investors who would like to put money here in the continent.